Is that medal for bravery or just pity?
It's for doing what you never had the courage to.
A waitress is laughed at for her scars until a veteran recognizes the unit tattoo. The clatter of dishes and cruel laughter echoed through the small diner as Zoe Harris carried her tray, unaware that in moments, a smartphone camera would capture her scars and broadcast her shame to the world. But hidden beneath her sleeve was a tattoo that would change everything when the right person finally noticed. The Magnolia Diner sat like a beacon of comfort food and Southern hospitality on the humid streets of Savannah, Georgia, its neon sign casting a warm glow over the Spanish moss that draped the ancient oaks outside. The summer of 2025 had been particularly brutal, with temperatures that seemed to press down on the city like a heavy blanket, forcing even the most modest souls to shed their protective layers. Inside the diner, ceiling fans churned lazily overhead, moving the thick air, but providing little relief from the oppressive heat that made every movement feel deliberate and exhausting. Zoe Harris had been working the evening shift for 3 years now, her movements through the cramped dining room as practiced as a soldier's drill. At 30 years old, she carried herself with the kind of quiet strength that spoke of battles fought and survived. Though most customers saw only a friendly waitress with a warm smile and efficient service. Her dark skin gleamed with perspiration despite the air conditioning. And tonight, for the first time in months, she had rolled up the sleeves of her uniform shirt past her elbows, revealing the intricate network of scars that mapped the story of her service across her left forearm. The scars were raised in silver, creating patterns that looked almost deliberate in their complexity. They started just above her wrist and traveled upward like lightning frozen in flesh. The result of shrapnel from an improvised explosive device that had torn through her Humvee outside Baghdad 3 years earlier. The explosion had killed 2 of her fellow soldiers and left Zoe with injuries that ended her military career, but not her desire to serve others in whatever capacity she could manage. Near her wrist, partially hidden by the scars, but still visible to those who knew what to look for, was a small tattoo that she had gotten during her deployment. The insignia of the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment was barely 2 inches across, but it represented everything that had shaped her into the woman she had become. The eagle, anchor, and crossed arrows were faded now, but they remained as permanent as the memories of the soldiers who had died beside her. Zoe had chosen waitressing not because she lacked other options, but because it allowed her to take care of people without the scrutiny that came with more visible professions. She could provide comfort through good food and attentive service, while maintaining the anonymity that helped her cope with the hypervigilance and social anxiety that plagued many veterans. The diner was her sanctuary, a place where she could be useful without having to explain her past or justify her present. The evening crowd was typical for a Thursday night, a mixture of locals grabbing dinner after work and tourists exploring Savannah's famous food scene. Most customers treated Zoe with the casual courtesy expected in the South, offering polite conversation and reasonable tips. But tonight was different. Tonight, Tyler Morrison and his 2 companions had chosen table 7 in the corner, and they had come with the kind of restless energy that spelled trouble for everyone around them. Tyler was 28 years old and carried himself with the artificial confidence of someone who had never faced real adversity. His expensive clothes and perfectly styled hair spoke of a life lived in comfort, while his eyes held the casual cruelty of someone who found entertainment in others' discomfort. His companions, Mia and Josh, orbited around him like satellites, eager to bask in his attention and participate in whatever drama he might create. The confrontation began the moment Zoe set their plates down on the scratched Formica table. Tyler's eyes immediately fixed on her exposed forearm, and a slow smile spread across his face as he recognized an opportunity for the kind of performance that would impress his friends and feed his need for dominance. "Hey, waitress!" he called out, his voice loud enough to carry across the small dining room. "What's with all the scars? Did you fall into a blender or something?" The question hit Zoe like a physical blow, causing her to freeze with her hands still resting on Tyler's plate. The familiar surge of anxiety and shame washed over her as she became acutely aware of every customer in the diner turning to look at her exposed arm. She had experienced this moment countless times in her nightmares, but the reality was somehow worse than anything her traumatized mind had conjured. Mia immediately pulled out her smartphone, angling it to capture Zoe's scarred arm while giggling like a teenager. "This is too good," she whispered, already composing a social media post that would turn Zoe's private pain into public entertainment. Josh joined in with his own crude comments, the three of them feeding off each other's energy like a pack of predators who had cornered wounded prey. "Your food is ready," Zoe managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper as she fought to maintain her professional composure. The military training that had once helped her survive combat zones now served a different purpose, allowing her to complete her task and retreat with some measure of dignity intact. But inside, she was crumbling, the carefully constructed walls that protected her civilian identity collapsing under the weight of public humiliation. From her usual table near the window, Evelyn Matthews watched the scene unfold with growing alarm. At 68 years old, the former military nurse had developed an eye for recognizing trauma in all its forms, and she could see the profound distress written across Zoe's face. More importantly, her experienced gaze had caught something that Tyler and his friends had missed entirely: the small military insignia tattooed near Zoe's wrist, partially obscured by scar tissue but unmistakable to someone who had spent decades treating wounded soldiers. Evelyn had been a regular at the Magnolia Diner for over 2 years, drawn not just by the excellent peach pie, but by Zoe's gentle manner and efficient service. She had suspected that the young woman might have a military background based on her posture, her way of scanning rooms upon entering, and the careful way she positioned herself with her back to walls whenever possible. Now, seeing the unit tattoo and the scars that could only have come from an explosive device, the pieces of Zoe's story fell into place with heartbreaking clarity. "Zoe, honey, are you all right?" Evelyn asked quietly as the waitress passed by her table, trying to escape to the relative safety of the kitchen. The concern in the older woman's voice was genuine and maternal, cutting through Zoe's defenses in a way that mockery never could. For a moment, their eyes met, and Evelyn saw the depth of pain that Zoe carried beneath her professional smile. "I'm fine, Mrs. Matthews," Zoe replied automatically, but her voice cracked slightly on the words, betraying the emotional storm raging beneath her composed exterior. She hurried toward the kitchen, desperate to find a place where she could collect herself before the other customers noticed her distress, but the damage was already spreading beyond the confines of the small diner. Mia had posted the photo to her Instagram account with the caption, "War Zone Survivor or Kitchen Accident? You decide." Scar story, sure and dramatic. And it was already accumulating likes and comments from people who saw Zoe's pain as nothing more than entertainment. The viral nature of social media meant that within minutes, strangers across the country would be speculating about the source of her injuries, making jokes at her expense, and reducing her service and sacrifice to a punchline. The rest of Zoe's shift passed in a haze of anxiety and hypervigilance. Every customer who looked at her seemed to be judging her scars. Every whispered conversation felt like mockery, and every laugh from other tables sounded like an attack on her dignity. She considered leaving early, claiming illness, but she needed the money and couldn't afford to risk her job by appearing unreliable. So she endured, serving food and taking orders while dying inside. Tyler's table lingered longer than necessary, clearly enjoying the discomfort they had caused. They ordered dessert slowly, asked for extra condiments, and generally made themselves as much of a burden as possible while continuing to make comments about Zoe's appearance whenever she came within earshot. Their cruelty was casual and thoughtless, the kind of mindless bullying that left deep wounds while providing shallow entertainment. When her shift finally ended at 10 o'clock, Zoe changed out of her uniform in the employee restroom and sat in her car for 20 minutes, trying to summon the strength to drive home. The photo had been shared dozens of times already, and her phone buzzed constantly with notifications from social media accounts she had forgotten she even had. Comments ranged from cruel jokes to invasive questions about her medical history, each one feeling like another violation of her privacy and dignity. She was still sitting in the parking lot when Evelyn Matthews knocked gently on her passenger window. The older woman had waited patiently in the diner until closing time, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the door for Zoe's emergence. When the restaurant closed and Zoe still hadn't appeared, Evelyn had ventured outside to check on her, recognizing the signs of someone struggling with overwhelming trauma. "Honey, I know you don't know me very well," Evelyn said through the car window, "but I think we need to talk. I've seen what you're carrying, and I think I might be able to help." Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades helping people through their darkest moments, combined with a gentleness that invited trust rather than demanding it. Zoe rolled down her window but didn't speak immediately. The presence of another person, especially someone who had witnessed her humiliation, felt both comforting and terrifying. Part of her wanted to drive away and never return to the diner, to find another job where no one knew about the photo or the scars or the weight of her past. But something in Evelyn's eyes suggested understanding rather than judgment. "I recognized your unit tattoo," Evelyn said quietly, settling into the conversation with the patience of someone who understood that healing couldn't be rushed. "3rd Battalion, 75th Rangers. I was a nurse with the 28th Combat Support Hospital in Iraq from 2004 to 2007. I treated a lot of soldiers from your unit." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. The revelation hit Zoe like a physical shock. For 3 years, she had successfully hidden her military background from her civilian co-workers and customers, carefully constructing an identity that had nothing to do with combat or sacrifice or the friends she had lost. The idea that someone had seen through her careful facade was both terrifying and oddly relieving. "I don't talk about that," Zoe said finally, her voice barely audible above the sound of traffic on the nearby street. "I just wanted to be normal, you know? I wanted to serve food and take orders and not have to explain what happened to me or why I can't sleep through the night or why I check every doorway twice before I walk through it." Evelyn nodded with the understanding of someone who had seen thousands of young soldiers struggle with the transition from military to civilian life. "You don't have to explain anything to me," she said, "but you also don't have to carry this burden alone. There are people in this community who understand what you've been through, who respect what you've sacrificed, and who would stand with you if you let them." The conversation that followed lasted nearly an hour, with Evelyn sharing stories from her own military service, and Zoe gradually opening up about her experiences in Iraq. The older woman had a gift for listening without judgment, for asking the right questions at the right moments, and for providing the kind of support that came from genuine understanding rather than pity or obligation. By the time they parted ways that night, Zoe had agreed to attend a veterans support group that met twice a week at the community center. It was a small step, but it represented the first crack in the wall she had built around her pain. For the first time in years, she felt like she might not have to face her struggles alone. The support group met in a modest room at the Savannah Community Center, surrounded by folding chairs arranged in a circle and inspirational posters that had seen better days. The first meeting Zoe attended included 8 other veterans representing different branches of service and different eras of conflict, united by their shared experience of trying to find their place in a world that didn't always understand or appreciate their sacrifice. Marcus Rodriguez was among the group members who made the strongest impression on Zoe during that first meeting. A 40-year-old Marine veteran who had served multiple deployments in Afghanistan. Marcus carried his own invisible wounds in the form of post-traumatic stress disorder that had cost him his marriage and nearly cost him his life. He had been attending the group for 2 years and had become something of an unofficial mentor to newer members. When Zoe shared her story about the incident at the diner, Marcus's reaction was immediate and visceral. "I know exactly who you are," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of respect and amazement. "You're the ranger who pulled 2 wounded soldiers out of that burning Humvee outside Fallujah. My unit was providing security for the convoy behind yours when the IED went off. I watched you drag those guys to safety while you were bleeding from your own wounds." The revelation stunned the entire group into silence. Zoe had never spoken about the actions that had earned her a Bronze Star with Valor, considering them nothing more than what any soldier would have done for their comrades. But Marcus had witnessed her heroism firsthand, and his testimony carried the weight of someone who understood the true cost of courage. "You saved Rodriguez and Martinez," Marcus continued, referring to the two soldiers Zoe had rescued. "Rodriguez made it home to his family because of what you did. Martinez didn't make it, but he died knowing that someone cared enough to risk everything for him. You're not just a waitress with scars. Zoe, you're a hero who happens to serve food." The power of being truly seen and recognized for who she was, rather than judged for what she looked like, began to transform Zoe's relationship with her own story. The support group became a place where she could practice talking about her experiences without shame, where she could receive validation for her service, and where she could begin to see her scars as badges of honor rather than sources of embarrassment. Meanwhile, the photograph continued to circulate on social media, accumulating thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Most were cruel or invasive, but a growing number began to push back against the mockery, asking questions about the story behind the scars and calling out the original posters for their lack of empathy. The viral nature of the internet meant that Zoe's pain was being broadcast to strangers around the world, but it also meant that her story was reaching people who understood and respected what she had endured. Tyler Morrison, who had started the whole controversy, remained oblivious to the deeper implications of his actions. He continued to frequent the Magnolia Diner with his friends, apparently proud of the attention their post had generated and unaware that forces were already in motion that would soon hold him accountable for his cruelty. The turning point came when the diner's owner, Robert Chen, decided to host a charity fundraiser for local veterans organizations. The event was scheduled for a Saturday evening, with live music, special menu items, and a silent auction featuring donations from local businesses. Robert had planned the fundraiser partly in response to the negative attention his restaurant had received from the viral photo, hoping to demonstrate his establishment's support for the military community. Zoe volunteered to work the event despite her anxiety about being in the spotlight again. The support group had been encouraging her to take more public stands about her service, and Evelyn had convinced her that the fundraiser was an opportunity to control her own narrative rather than letting others define her story. Still, as the evening approached, Zoe felt the familiar symptoms of hypervigilance and social anxiety that had plagued her since her return from Iraq. The fundraiser drew a larger crowd than anyone had expected, filling the diner's small dining room and spilling out onto a hastily constructed patio in the parking lot. Local veterans organizations set up information tables. A small stage hosted acoustic performances by soldier musicians, and the atmosphere was warm with community support and shared purpose. Tyler arrived with his usual entourage, apparently viewing the event as another opportunity for entertainment rather than a serious occasion honoring military service. He had no idea that several members of Zoe's support group were scattered throughout the crowd, or that Evelyn Matthews had spent the week reaching out to her own network of military contacts to ensure that Zoe would have plenty of allies in the room. The confrontation began when Tyler, emboldened by alcohol and the attention of his friends, decided to make another public spectacle of Zoe's appearance. As she carried a tray of food past his table, he stood up and called out loudly, "Hey everyone, look, it's our favorite scarred waitress. Tell us again how you got those battle wounds in the kitchen." The room fell silent as heads turned toward the source of the disturbance. But instead of the embarrassed retreat Tyler expected, Zoe set down her tray deliberately and walked over to the small stage that had been set up for the evening's entertainment. Marcus Rodriguez, who had been watching from across the room, immediately moved to support her, followed by 3 other members of their veterans group. "My name is Zoe Harris," she said, taking the microphone with steady hands despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I'm a former Army Ranger, and I got these scars serving my country in Iraq." Her voice carried clearly through the silent room, and she could feel the energy shift as people began to understand the true nature of what they were witnessing. She rolled up her sleeve completely, exposing not just the scars but also the unit tattoo that had been hidden beneath the edge of her uniform. This tattoo represents the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. I served with honor alongside some of the bravest men and women I've ever known, and some of them didn't make it home. These scars are the price I paid for my freedom and yours." Marcus stepped up beside her, rolling up his own sleeve to reveal a similar tattoo. "Zoe Harris pulled me and another soldier out of a burning vehicle after an IED explosion," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She was wounded herself, bleeding from shrapnel wounds. But she came back for us anyway. She's the reason I'm standing here tonight instead of buried in Arlington Cemetery." The applause that erupted from the crowd was immediate and thunderous, but it was quickly joined by something more powerful. The sound of chairs scraping as dozens of people stood up in recognition of Zoe's service. Veterans throughout the room began identifying themselves, sharing their own branches of service and deployments, creating a wave of solidarity that washed over the entire event. But the most surprising moment came when Evelyn Matthews took the microphone, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades earning the right to speak truth to power. "Tyler Morrison," she said, looking directly at the young man who had started the evening's drama. "I know why you felt the need to mock this young woman's sacrifices." The room turned to focus on Tyler, who had gone pale and was looking desperately for an exit that didn't exist. Evelyn continued, her voice gentle but implacable. "You grew up in poverty, didn't you? You were the kid who couldn't afford to join the school clubs, who got teased for wearing thrift store clothes, who learned that the best defense against being picked on was to pick on someone else first." The accuracy of Evelyn's assessment was written across Tyler's face as he struggled to maintain his composure. She had spent the week quietly investigating his background through her extensive network of community contacts, not to weaponize his pain, but to understand the source of his cruelty. What she had discovered was a young man whose childhood had been marked by economic insecurity and social isolation, creating wounds that he had never learned to heal constructively. "I'm not excusing your behavior," Evelyn continued, "but I understand it. You learned to hurt others before they could hurt you, to tear down people who seem vulnerable because it made you feel stronger. But Zoe Harris isn't vulnerable. Tyler, she's a warrior who chose to serve others instead of herself, and she deserves your respect, not your mockery." The confrontation could have ended with Tyler's humiliation, but Zoe chose a different path. Instead of accepting his shame as sufficient payment for his cruelty, she extended an invitation that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. "Tyler, you don't need to apologize to me," she said, her voice carrying the kind of grace that could only come from someone who had faced real adversity and chosen forgiveness over vengeance. "But if you want to understand what real strength looks like, you're welcome to join our Veterans Support Group. We meet twice a week, and we help each other carry burdens that are too heavy for one person alone." The offer hung in the air like a bridge between two different worlds, one defined by cruelty and insecurity, the other by service and mutual support. Tyler stared at her for a long moment, tears streaming down his face as he confronted, perhaps for the first time, the consequences of his actions and the possibility of choosing a different path forward. The fundraiser continued for several more hours, but the energy had fundamentally shifted from entertainment to genuine community building. People who had never spoken to each other before found common ground in their respect for military service, while veterans who had been struggling in isolation discovered they were part of a larger community of people who understood their experiences. Zoe found herself at the center of conversations she had been avoiding for years, sharing stories about her deployment, her recovery, and her ongoing challenges with civilian life. Instead of the judgment and pity she had feared, she encountered respect, gratitude, and genuine interest in her experiences. For the first time since her return from Iraq, she felt like her service was being honored rather than hidden. The immediate aftermath of the fundraiser was transformative for everyone involved. The viral photo that had originally been shared to mock Zoe's scars was now being reshared with context about her military service, turning a symbol of cruelty into a testament to courage and sacrifice. Comments that had once been cruel and invasive were replaced by expressions of gratitude and respect from people who finally understood the true story behind her wounds. Tyler Morrison kept his word about joining the Veterans Support Group, Though his first few meetings were awkward and difficult as he struggled to understand his place in a community defined by service rather than self-interest. Gradually, however, he began to find his own ways to contribute, using his social media skills to promote veterans' causes and his business connections to secure donations for the group's activities. The Magnolia Diner became an unofficial gathering place for the Savannah veterans community, with Robert Chen creating a special section of the menu featuring dishes named after local military units and dedicating a wall to photographs and memorabilia from area veterans. Zoe's story had transformed not just her own life, but the entire culture of the establishment where she worked. Marcus Rodriguez, energized by the success of the fundraiser, launched a nonprofit organization called Scars Tell Stories that connected veterans with opportunities to share their experiences in schools, community organizations, and corporate settings. The program's mission was to humanize military service for civilian audiences while providing veterans with platforms to reclaim control over their own narratives. Evelyn Matthews was recognized by the City Council for her role in bridging the gap between military and civilian communities. But she deflected the attention back to the veterans she had helped connect with resources and support. "I didn't do anything special," she insisted during the recognition ceremony. "I just listened, and then I helped people find each other." The most profound transformation was in Zoe herself. The woman who had once hidden her service out of shame and fear became a powerful advocate for veterans' rights and a mentor to other women who had served in combat roles. She began speaking at high schools about the opportunities available in military service, at colleges about veterans' experiences in higher education, and at corporate events about the value of hiring veterans. 6 months after the fundraiser, Zoe was invited to throw out the first pitch at a Savannah Bananas baseball game during their annual Military Appreciation Night. As she stood on the pitcher's mound in her Army Ranger t-shirt, her scarred arm clearly visible as she wound up for the throw, the crowd of 8,000 people rose to their feet in a sustained ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. The photograph from that moment, Zoe smiling confidently as she prepared to throw the pitch, her scars and her service both proudly displayed, replaced the cruel image that had originally gone viral. This new photo was shared tens of thousands of times, accompanied by stories about her heroism in Iraq and her continued service to her community at home. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during a quiet evening at the diner, as Evelyn watched Zoe confidently lead a conversation with a table full of visiting veterans who had come specifically to meet the woman whose story had inspired them. The transformation from the frightened, isolated waitress to the confident advocate and community leader was complete, but it had been built on the foundation of service and sacrifice that had always been there, waiting to be recognized and honored. "You know what I'm proudest of?" Evelyn asked Zoe as they cleaned up after another successful fundraising event. "It's not that we showed Tyler how wrong he was, though that was important. It's that we showed you how right you've always been, about your service, about your worth, and about your place in this community." Zoe smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the unit tattoo on her wrist, no longer hidden beneath long sleeves but displayed as a badge of honor and identity. "Thank you for reminding me that my scars tell a story worth sharing," she replied. "And thank you for helping me remember that I never stopped being a ranger, even when I forgot it myself."